Welcome to KickUp's webinar about measuring and refreshing your personal professional learning communities. My name is Dan Gottlieb. I am the host of this webinar. We're very excited to have all of you here today, and I promise we're going to keep this brief. Once I walk you through some housekeeping, I'm going to set up some introductions to our panelists and our moderator for today's conversation. Then we're just going to go ahead and jump into 3 different questions, and I'd like to note that at the beginning of question 3, we're also going to be setting up a situation where we'd like you all to participate. Just a couple pieces of housekeeping before we get started. We are assuming that all of you that are here are familiar with PLC protocols. This would be a 201, 301, 401, etc. level introduction to PLC protocols. Be present. We're going to have a follow-up recording and blog post. So really just take this as an opportunity to listen and think and take select notes and put your questions into the webinar too so you can get the most out of it. Don't worry, we're definitely going to make sure that you have access to all of the resources that are discussed here. And number 3 is your input's really encouraged. You'll notice that there is a Q&A area at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to share your questions there. If we don't answer them here live during the webinar, we will do our best to make sure that they are covered in the follow-up write-up. And if we don't get them done there, we're going to make sure we include those in the way that we think about addressing these kinds of webinars and topics that you're interested in us talking about in the future. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our awesome panelists and moderator. Joining us from the area of cooperative educational services in Connecticut, we have Leslie Abbatiello.
Hi, everybody.
Joining us from Delaware at the Colonial School District, Assistant Superintendent Dr. Lori Duerr.
Hello, everyone.
And a professional development specialist and regional tech integrator from the service agency of the Broome-Tioga BOCES in New York, Dustin Andrus.
Hey, everybody.
So we have a diverse group. And our moderator today is KickUp's co-founder and chief client experience officer, Vicki Kinzig.
Hello.
So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and kick over the conversation to Vicki so she can start asking questions of our panelists.
Sure. So this first question is for Lori and Dustin specifically. And can you share, in your opinion, what are the top 3 ways to build time within the schedule for active and engaged professional learning communities? And why do you think those are effective?
Okay, if you want me to start, I'll get started. First of all, I think it's just a real commitment from the top. I know when we started, it was a top priority. We believe that the time commitment and collaboration make a difference in the teacher practice and student outcomes. We worked with our teacher union and dedicated 90 minutes per week of protected and uninterrupted time for teachers to collaborate. We provided training and protocols. Most importantly, we consistently delivered the message on the big ideas of PLCs and the 4 critical questions. And we made sure that we believe in professional learning and we believe in supports. And so we provided a lot of supports for our teachers to be active and be effective in PLCs. So we did have protocols for them to follow. We didn't deviate from the expectations. We developed a observation feedback protocol, all district level and admin at the school level participated, set in on PLCs, provided feedback. We also allowed for that opportunity for teachers to provide feedback on what they needed to continue to be successful. We did away with all of our after-school faculty meetings, and PLCs became the sole focus of how we were going to raise student achievement.
Great. And Dustin, let's hear from you.
Yeah, to echo some of the points that Lori was saying, it's really a commitment of kind of the administrative leadership team to really recognize that, you know, if you're going to really provide this time, make sure it's meaningful for teachers to be able to have direction with clear outcomes, clear objectives. What is the point of why they're meeting? And some of the ways that so I work with 20 different school districts as a technology integrator. I'm responsible for all the instructional technology PD for those 20 school districts. So sometimes mass trainings are really not what we're looking for. So really dedicated, like leadership, really being able to scaffold learning levels of teachers, of how they're meeting their needs, of what they're talking about at those PLC groups within their district. I mean, really taking those approaches and really just taking a hard look at your schedule and saying, where are we really going to take a dedicated aim at giving our teachers the ability to talk to each other about the things that they need to talk. And some of the other ways that we've seen really the building time is through digital platforms. So I work with school districts of how do you build meaningful digital communities within their school districts that keeps conversation going when face-to-face meeting time is really hard to do within a schedule, that things can't be moved around. So that's kind of the things that I've seen or that I've worked with school districts on developing, more of digital support communities among teachers to be able to find those times to communicate.
Great. And so the primary ways we heard were, just to clarify, Lori, converting staff meetings or doing mostly after school meetings and dedicating them to the PLCs as well as the digital communities.
So if I can also just add for a second, Vicki, we also created a formal structure of with PLC teacher leaders as well. And so they were our, leaders that, provided resources for teachers to become better, but it was also to work side by side with the admin to develop a continuous improvement plan within the school and to continue to get better as well. And I just think between the training and all the support, again, was the key, features that I felt like made things effective for us. And just that persistent messaging from the top of the vision, just around everything, included with PLCs was important.
Great. Leslie, did you want to add anything to the conversation on this question?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate Lori's statement about the commitment coming from the top. I also think that there has to be commitment from the grassroots. And in some of the 26 plus districts that we work in, we see an awful lot of effective professional learning community time happening during those team meetings that were formerly department meetings or grade level meetings. Several of those schools and districts have turned that time over to a modified version of lesson study, for example, where teachers have the opportunity to identify their own problems of practice as evidenced in what's happening in their classrooms and each other's classrooms. They collaborate around developing a lesson that they then go and teach in their classrooms with the rest of the team observing, and then they debrief together to talk about how effectively they've addressed those problems of practice. Some of these schools and districts have also eliminated the typical after-school faculty meeting and instead have given that time over to PLC time. However, those that have kept that time are using it to ensure that there is that through line from district initiative to building initiative right down to the classroom. So those are a couple of ways that I've seen PLCs amplified in the buildings that we work in.
So if I can just chime in as well, similar to the lesson study idea, it's a great, that's such a great idea to do. I love how that creates really good stewards of education. We've started in our region with some of our schools in leading some instructional rounds with PLC schools within that, and kind of leading that and going through, what are the protocols of instructional rounds, and trying to help schools break down those barriers of being intrusive in a classroom and stuff like that. We've been using technology to really do that. So we have it set up so we've been using swivel technology to record group thinking of students. So we'll have our PLC group sit in one room and watch the live teaching, and the students and the teachers will be able to debrief out loud why the class is going on, so they're not being disruptive. They can really record those thoughts. So that's one way we are kind of leveraging technology to be less like body intrusive into a classroom to get a false reality of really what's going on. So, I mean, that's one way, or like one protocol that we're kind of developing in our region around that idea.
Let's move on to the next and talk a bit about the effectiveness of professional learning and ensuring that they're effective. So this question is for all three panelists, but what are the specific outcomes that you look for to determine if your PLC is effective and whether you need to make adjustments mid-year? And subsequently, how can leaders assess how near or far you've strayed from these intended outcomes? And this time, let's start with Leslie.
We've actually been doing some work for the past couple of years on developing a protocol for our own program evaluation in terms of determining the impact of the work that we're doing in our districts. And one of the pieces of work that we developed was a logic model that describes professional learning communities. And by doing that, I've done pretty significant thinking about exactly this question, so I'm really glad that you're asking it. We see three defining areas in PLC practice, and they basically boil down to technical components, procedural components, and then aspects of collaborative engagement. And the technical components are those really fundamental pieces, such as, have you identified the right participants for the PLC? Have you dedicated that meeting time? And is it actually a standing scheduled meeting of sufficient length? And do your participants have access to the data that they need, whether that data be quantitative data or qualitative data in the form of artifacts, student work, teacher work, etc. If those things aren't in place, it's really evident that they're not, and then an immediate correction is required to get things on track. The procedural components is where things get a little bit more complex. A discussion protocol needs to be in place because that provides the roadmap for the conversation. Team members need to know how to work within that protocol, and they have to be guided by a skilled facilitator, which could be an external person or a member of the team, a teacher leader, who is sufficiently expert in using that process. There's got to be a focus on some kind of data to provide that third point in the conversation. Again, student work, teacher work, or other. And then all of those things, again, are pretty obvious when they're not there and can be immediately corrected. The collaborative engagement piece is where we have worked with engaging PLC participants in identifying their own look-fors. So if three tenets of the PLC are, for example, shared responsibility, teacher agency, and the building of social capital, an effective practice that we've found is working with the PLC to identify indicators of those things in practice. What do they look and sound like when it's going well, for example? And the point is to see those things occurring and to ensure that you're seeing growth over time. So the idea of mid-course corrections, to me, that's an important idea, but as important, if not more important, is the notion that you can make the necessary adjustments and corrections ongoing. If you've got the right indicators in place and they're clear and there's a shared understanding, you can actually use a checklist or some kind of rubric during meetings so that participants can monitor their own participation and their own growth as it occurs.
Great, I love that. And Lori, would you like to hop in next?
Sure. I mean, we focused on, the 4 questions with our teachers, and it became, the most important piece of it, along with, the protocols. Of course, we created a protocol for them to follow through their PLC so that they knew that they were hitting that, talking about, what students need to learn, how will they know when they learn it, and then what are you going to do if they don't, or when are you going to do it if they already know it. At the same time, we were, we are very data rich, and we were had a lot of we did an emphasis on how do you really analyze the data, but it's beyond the data analysis. you've got to be able to make sure that you're actually measuring. So, our training teachers on how to actually make sure that we're assessing correctly and then putting it into action. So it's not enough just to assess, we've got to do something with that. And so, making sure that we're seeing all that together, and then just having that evidence. So beyond just the data points that they looked at, I mean, they needed the evidence to show that they were actually focused on this. When we started, Common Core was just coming around, and there was a lot of learning around that. So we're implementing RTI, we're implementing how do you actually analyze data, we're implementing PLC protocols. And so we found in the beginning there's just a lot of planning time and looking at data, but we weren't necessarily seeing the results. And I think every time we add something new in, we have to figure out how do we integrate this and give time to actually learn what they're doing as teachers, so that we can have that effective practice after. So the outcomes were different at different times. To kind of tag on what Leslie was saying on the first question, teachers, I absolutely, we are a district that believes in the grassroots, and the teacher out. But this was something that was actually something that we felt and believed that this was going to improve student outcomes. So in the beginning, it wasn't all about teachers believing in the collaboration. It was soon after that I would say if we tried to take it away, there's no way the teachers would just go and do it on their own anyway, and they saw the value, which is good. So that was one of our measures, that teachers wanted to, and they were meeting on their own outside of that 90 minutes. So those were two indicators to us that the teachers valued the time and that they were learning together, and that learning together was much more efficient and effective than doing everything in isolation. So those were important. But again, as we were digging deeper, there was a lot of time spent on that planning and the data, and we were doing interventions, but differentiation was still difficult. And, so once we started moving in to kind of tag onto Dustin, talking about the whole integration and using technology really, started helping us. We had to learn that, but bringing technology into our world, that digital convergence actually became an outcome we were looking at, because it actually helped with that differentiation over time.
Great. Dustin, would love to hear your voice in this one.
Sure. So I'm going to focus more on the from the PLC that I've been running for facilitating for about 6 years now. So started this PLC as a teacher coming into more of this broad regional role as a high-end kind of super user of technology integration in the classroom. And one of the things I was really missing as a teacher was a community of people in which I could talk to about the things that I was struggling with. I was a lot of your high-end, super users or technology like integrators who are always pushing, or find that they have this kind of like lost sentiment within their own school sometimes, because they can't speak on the same language with other people, and that's great for them, but they need a community of users. So I developed this PLC, our regional PLC of these 3 or 4 super users that are just way above your normal typical school teacher and how they're using technology in the classroom. So I have a PLC about 40 teachers. We meet that come from 20 different school districts, and we meet to talk about their specific needs, and we meet 4 times a year. So the first meeting we always have is setting norms of the meeting and talking about the goals and what really matters in teaching and learning. And a lot of that stuff is based off from Hattie's research of visible learning outcomes. So we always take, I have the teachers focus on their own personal growth of taking one of those visible learning outcomes, and then reflect upon it. And the 4 times that we meet throughout the year, the teachers, they're paired up with another teacher from another school district as a support partner. So they have to keep in contact with each other throughout the year and support articles around, I would say, artifacts. They would submit artifacts to each other to kind of a discussion board, so it's visible, and their goals are visible. and being able to reflect upon whether that they're meeting their goals, how many artifacts are they using with students to kind of move their teaching towards meeting that goal. And so we're really doing a lot of qualitative data assessment, and that's how we kind of measure whether or not the effectiveness of our PLC is working. So if teachers are seeing their growth throughout the year of saying like, man, I really wasn't focusing on formative assessment in my classroom, and this is how I've grown throughout the year. And these are my visible artifacts of students and me implementing more formative assessment and how that's working and growing. I mean, that's how we're really doing. We're really just putting the onus on the teachers to take advantage of like their own learning and saying like, yeah, I have to be responsible for this, and I'm going to hold myself accountable for it, and my support partner as well. So that's kind of how we measure the effectiveness. And it's all public too. So like if they put it out there, then they they kind of have to do it. It's kind of like when people post like workouts on social media, half the time they do it because now it's public and somebody's going to ask them about it. It's more for their own motivation.
Yeah, those are some great ideas from all three of you. And have any of you run into, the second part of this question is if things do get off course, or an example of, noticing when PLCs do get off course, what is a course correction that's, an easy and effective one to make, or what's an example of a time you've noticed that?
So we absolutely, I do think that in that mid-year, you start to, kind of wane from, all the expectations. I really think that I'm going to go back to the message from the top and the expectations, and, the building from the district, but the building principal also. All of our principals actually participate in the PLCs. We have content area coaches that are a part of the PLCs. And so it's just, the expectation that this is the way we do business now, and not letting go of that. But everybody needs a boost. And I think, doing those celebrations, making sure that, that we find ways of kind of renewing things. Like this year, we're 7th year in on doing PLCs, but we're looking at, we definitely, the idea of PLCs obviously is that we make everybody better, right? But we still have outliers. We have teachers that are just blowing it away. And so we are actually, creating now new PLCs for teachers to really look at what are the practices, what's happening differently in those classrooms consistently year over year, that is making that difference. And, having teachers figure that out, and then, coming back to their PLCs and trying to share that and trying to work to just improve those practices too. So I think there's, we're always we're looking for something to kind of reboot. Our leadership team, we did in year 5, we did a complete PLC reboot because, we thought after year 3 that it was just a part of the way we were doing business, and we did slack a little. I mean, lesson learned. And then we now know you cannot do that. So, we saw that in year 4, and we saw some results going down. And so in year 5, we did a complete reboot again, and got back to our leadership teams and had schools refocus on their protocols, and that helps. But I think it's just really being mindful and paying attention to the implementation is helpful.
Great. Any other examples from the crowd of a time you noticed things get off course and a specific course of action you took to adjust expectations or try new protocols that might remediate?
I can answer that, or chime in at least. I've been doing this year and last year, I've been working a lot around kind of cognitive coaching and what are the aspects of that, and just kind of helping teachers self-assess and redirect focus. So the qualitative data that I was talking about, when teachers are reflecting and really seeing, it's not only for their support partner, but for me as like the facilitator of the PLC, I can see what teachers are kind of like struggling in their thinking a little bit, or just missing their marks a little bit. And that's when I can schedule time. I regularly schedule time to go in and observe teachers or just talk about what's going on in their classroom, and use cognitive coaching models. So that could be walking meetings, really just having them talk through the process and saying like, okay, so this is what you're struggling with. Let's talk about, some corrective action or some plans, like legitimate foundational plans in which we can, get back on track. And teachers are pretty responsive to that when you're just, letting them talk, like, let's just talk it out. And usually they answer their own questions of why they're struggling and formulate their own plans.
Dustin, who actually sees, I know that you said you collect a couple of different types of evidence and self-reflections and a lot of qualitative feedback. And I know you said something about it's public or it's transparent. Who actually sees that information to be able to act upon, the challenges that are arising?
Yeah, so within our PLC, we have we use a Schoology group to be able to manage all of that. And all of our PLC members, I think there's 40 to 60 people in it. They can see within the message board what the teachers are posting as their reflections, be able to comment, give support. But each teacher has a dedicated support partner in which they can talk to throughout the year, and be able to bounce ideas off from. Usually it's another teacher who teaches a similar content area or a similar grade level. But the whole thinking, like all the teachers' visible reflections are visible to the whole group. So we've kind of built this collective support community for each other. It's like technology integration. Like we have people who have a problem with technology integration. So like they come to their support group and they get everything that they need to become better at what they do.
Great. And maybe just to keep the conversation going, we'll move on to our last piece. And in this last question, we're talking a bit more about alignment between PLCs and the district priorities. So the question is, what advice would you give to other district leaders for creating alignment between their high-profile district priorities and the work that's being done in PLCs, so that your PLCs can both feel supportive and also move the needle at the district level? And as a follow-up, why is this so hard to establish this alignment? So maybe this time, let's go ahead and start with Lori.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to, I think, from the top, if it's important, we're going to send that message in the vision. And, the fact is that, we do have competing initiatives, that take time. And I think back to teachers need time to learn. So whatever it is we're doing, they need time to learn that. And if the time in a PLC is focused on those 4 questions and it's the content area, then you don't necessarily have time to learn the other. And so when we moved to the whole digital convergence, then that, we did have to learn Schoology, to Dustin. You just don't inherently know these things. You did have to learn how do you, change your pedagogy when you're looking at a blended classroom opposed to the traditional teaching. And so it's valuable for teachers. The PLCs is the perfect opportunity for teachers to learn from each other and to do that. But then it can be distracting away from what we've always said, those 4 questions have to be answered. You got to stay focused on that because that moves the needle. But they also need time, and we have to provide time. And we know time, there's very little time for that. We're also a district that believes strongly in, the social emotional learning of students and and wellness. And so there's got to be time to plan for that and time to make sure that that's a part of the bigger picture, because we believe students will achieve higher if we're focused on that. So, just to mention, so, when we're talking about personalized learning, we move into, we're going to a competency-based grading. And so teachers have to learn that. And so it all comes together, and it is all absolutely part of PLCs, but it all takes time. So we notice that, some things start to slide as we, integrate something new, but they need time to study, but then it all starts coming together. But I think at the district level, it's our responsibility to show that alignment, to make that transparent, to show how it all ties together, so that you know, and know that it's okay that that they have that time to learn that, but we still have to stay focused, and we will get there.
Great. And if you're in the audience, feel free to chat in using the chat button at the bottom of your screen any of your thoughts on this sense of alignment and why this alignment is so difficult to establish. Leslie, would love to hear from you while that's happening.
Yeah, Lori, I agree with you about time, and time is the most precious commodity in some ways, and it's also the biggest barrier, or lack of time can be the biggest barrier to achieving that necessary alignment. The districts that I've seen that have been most successful at creating this coherence have actually spent time at all levels of the district ensuring that there's a shared understanding of what those high priority district level goals and areas of focus are. That way there's no way for anyone to wiggle out of pursuing the continuous improvement because they don't know what the district means when they say student engagement, for example. So one of the key aspects of all of this for me in terms of what I've seen in the work that we do is to be committed to spending that time, ensuring that there's shared understanding, and also, again, engaging folks at the building level in the identification of real life examples of what those priorities can look like or actually do look like in practice. That way you've got that sort of shared accountability. And even though it may be a top-down driver, you still have teachers in the building level and administrators at the building level supporting, you know, having their oars in the water rowing in the same direction as well, because they actually do understand what it is district is looking for and what that looks like.
Sorry, I was muted. Dustin, would you like to hop in here?
Sure. So I think Leslie and Lori both kind of talked about, in a way, kind of clarity is one of the big obstacles of teachers really knowing, like, where are we going, and really working on the district level to really be clear and focused on a couple things and make sure that, you know, the community is built within the school and that kind of environment is really there before establishing kind of what those clear outcomes are for the school district as a whole, and then really filtering them down to your PLC and then down to the individual teacher. There is a school district that I work with that has a very, very clear expectations and has built the community and kind of the school culture around this of really saying, like, these are the three things in our vision as a school district. All of our PLCs are going to be aligned to one of those, and each one of your individual goals as a teacher needs to be aligned to one of those either PLC goals, which are aligned to the bigger focus within the district. And that way it shows the continuous alignment through. So if the individual teachers start focusing on those goals, then it will ultimately affect the bigger district goal. And the teachers are not allowed to have goals, like personal teaching goals, outside of those, outside of the district goals. So it's really interesting how they built this community to really, somebody said it in the chat about buy-in, about establishing the buy-in with teachers to move that needle. And it's really interesting how some schools have it and some schools don't, and what are the multiple variables which kind of like influences that. You know, is it too many competing initiatives? Is it not clarity? Is it union stuff? There's so many things in a school district that influence moving the needle. So to get them to all line up, you know, that's probably one of the hardest jobs as a district administrator. So it's interesting, and the conversation can go a really long time about how do you do it, not theoretically, but you know, in the wild, as we say.
Yeah, and I think you just started to touch upon it, Dustin. Wondering if Lori or Leslie, you have other thoughts on why this alignment is so hard to establish, or areas in which you've seen it established really effectively. Yeah, why is it so hard?
Well, I think where we've seen it established most effectively is because there's actual commitment. You know, there's a commitment at the district level to allocating the resources, time included, to ensuring that the initiative takes root and has time to get the necessary traction so that you see the results. Where we see initiatives fail, such as not having this kind of alignment or coherence, is when at the district level there's professed commitment, but then actions contradict that. So, Lori, I'm sure that you've witnessed this as well. Things come up, or new initiatives come around that are either mandates that you have to address right away, or that come with funding, and so those are embraced, and it just becomes more and more difficult to stay focused on that thing that you said you wanted to be focused on in the first place. So I guess those are sort of, you know, human foibles and failings, but where there's been the most success, folks are able to sort of keep their eye on the prize, and they've prioritized the thing in the first place for some very good reasons, and they recognize that they need to put their resources behind that and continue driving forward.
I would just add on real quick that, I mean, commitment is absolutely, I would agree with you, is important, but sometimes until we know what they're committing to, or they have an understanding of what that success is, it's hard to get commitment from everyone. So you do have your first pioneers to step out, and it's trying to build and grow that over time till you get to that tipping point, where at what point, you know, and then it becomes just, you know, the way we're doing business. Everybody needs to get on board with that, but not everyone sees that value from the very beginning. So I think that is a struggle for a time, which I think is even more important from building leadership and district leadership to show that commitment from that level, and, you know, and that belief, and celebrate the early wins, and to, you know, and to be able to continue to highlight where we are being successful. And to keep all of those competing initiatives away. I mean, you've got to have some top priorities. And to Leslie's point, yes, there are things that come down from the state, or there are grants that are being kind of tossed in front of you. You know, this is the next best thing, do this. And it's tough sometimes to keep all of that at bay, because we're going to stay focused. And, you know, but I do agree with you know, allowing teachers, you know, you got to throw it out there and let them develop and create and have ownership of it. So, you know, whether we're starting a new program of study or whatever, let them develop it. And that again, comes back to, you know, the time's an issue, but it is much, you know, it's a much more successful implementation when teachers see the value and make that grow.
It's a really excellent conversation. As I'm listening and trying to connect the dots between the themes around commitment, around communication, and around building buy-in at the building level, at the PLC level, how much time is appropriate for that, right? How much time should it take? Is it a year? Is it a month, right? You know, give me a sense of perspective in terms of, obviously that depends on the initiative, but let's take one of education's big concepts, right? Personalization, personalized learning, right? For whatever it means to you and your districts and anybody on this webinar, right? Just how much time does it take to have the conversation and to create that alignment?
More than a month.
Is that, yeah, Lori, I'd be curious to hear from your perspective. Dustin and Leslie, I'd love to understand, you know, time-wise, right, those districts that you've seen be successful with this, you know, how much time did they put into building that buy-in?
So, I mean, first, it's got to be a thoughtful process. So instead of thinking as in time that it needs to, you know, that in 3 months or in 6 months that we have to be there, and know that it is ongoing. And so in 3 months, you might have a benchmark of where you know, expect to be. And in a year from now, 3 years from now, you know, we've been doing the digital convergence for 5 years. And, you know, we are continuously reevaluating and course corrections, because we continue to learn too, so as we're setting out the path, and then, and I feel as long as we're moving forward and we're learning and then implementing what we're learning and not staying so rigid to our original plan, but willing to adjust as we learn ourselves, and then give teachers time. I'm going to keep coming. Teachers time. I know that when we started the first year, we really took a lot of training and put it in our first cohort in the whole first year. And we told them that they were not going to be evaluated in the first year because we wanted. So they were free from the evaluations while they were playing and learning in their classroom. But it was a lot of training too close. So we changed our training model for over 3 years. So our cohorts after that had 3 years of learning and implementation. So I think it's you kind of have to, play with it and learn with it and based on the initiative itself. And I think you're going to have to differentiate between teachers, because I think different teacher groups are going to take more time than other teachers. And you have to build that differentiation for them as well.
Mm.
Iterate. And that seems like a theme where at the leadership level, you make that very clear, right? Would you agree with that you're communicating that this is a learning process, that your feedback at the building, at the teacher, at the PLC level is going to help us make the necessary changes to move the needle? Is that part of the message?
Absolutely. It has to be.
Excellent. Well, we're about out of time. I just want to go ahead and say that this has been a phenomenal panel. I really am grateful for the time, effort, and energy that all three of you have put in. We may have lost Vicky due to the pitfalls of Wi-Fi technology, but that's okay. I want to acknowledge everybody that is here, that we did not get to your questions in the webinar, but out of respect for your time, I'm not going to extend this out past an hour. So what I'm going to do, my pledge to you, is I will be sure to go through the feedback, go through the chat, go through the questions, and do my best to make sure we address them in our write-up and our follow-up. And so without further ado, just want to say thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Dustin, for your time, your ideas, and we're really excited, and we've hoped that this is helpful for everybody that has been staying with us throughout the entire cast. And we look forward to seeing you on our future webinars. And I hope everybody has a marvelous rest of the day and the week.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks everybody.